Hi everyone, this is Joy with Create It with Joy. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. I appreciate you guys. Today I've made 4 cards using the Incredible Women stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. Also, I have used the Mom die, word die, from Simon Says Stamp. Today I wanted to challenge myself with just sticking with one stamp set and making these 4 cards, and I really do love how they turned out, and it was pretty fun to do. So let's get started. So here are some cardstock colors that I'm going to use for this first card, and that light blue through the dark pink comes from Lawn Fawn's Sherbet cardstock paper pack, and then I'm using a peacock cardstock because I needed to have five or six colors. So what I have done is cut my strips down to about a ½ an inch, and I wanted to line each one of these up with the sentiment. It spells out mother, and then it's got these great words like admire and marvelous and loved and all of those things, and it spells out the word mother. So I wanted each word to have its own color paper strip. So I trimmed those up. I am lining them up with each sentiment, getting the sentiment centered in each paper strip, prepping it with my anti-static tool, inking it with clear embossing ink. I have used Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink for this. Then embossing it with white embossing powder. I'm setting those aside. I'm doing them all at the same time, setting them aside because I can heat them all up at the same time. Once you've put your embossing powder on, you've got some time. And clear embossing ink is sticky, so if you wanted to ink them all up and then add your embossing powder, it would probably work. But I wanted to get my embossing powder on it to make sure nothing dried. And then, like I said, I can heat them all up at the same time. So I just used my Tim Holtz paper trimmer to trim them down, like I said, to about a ½ an inch. Got them all trimmed up. That way they would all be equal. You could do this another way. I mean, you could stamp this out on the whole sentiment on multiple colors of cardstock and then trim it out that way. I just wanted to be a little more precise, which is not usually my style, but for this I felt like it was important. I am not a girl who likes to measure. It drives me nutty. That's why I don't sew, because measuring is just, is not my thing. So I'm going to do this last one here. Again, prepping every one of them with an anti-static tool because you don't want embossing powder floating around where it doesn't belong. So now I'm going to heat these up, and make sure your heat gun is nice and warmed up, and then they heat up nice and quick. And I love how the white embossing powder looks on all of these colored cardstocks. It is so, so pretty. When I'm done embossing these, I'm going to glue these down in order on a piece of white cardstock and trim that around so it's got this solid base. You'll see that here in just a second. So now so there's that white solid base, and I'm adding some adhesive to the back of that, and I wanted to frame this out with some black cardstock, a tiny little frame, because it does make it it makes it pop. So just a little bit of a frame here. And then I'm going to adhere some fun foam on the back of that. But first I'm going to stamp my A2 sized card base with some black ink. These are the floral images out of the Incredible Women stamp set. And so I'm going to stamp this all over the back of this cardstock, and I am going to leave these colors black. I'm not going to color them in, which you could. I wanted all the color to be on the sentiment strips, all that colored paper and that beautiful kind of rainbow color striped pattern. I wanted all the color to be there, but I didn't want a stark white background. So I wanted to take these really pretty floral images from the stamp set and just stamp them all over this background, taking the flowers, some of the leaves. I even stamp in the center, even though you're not going to see anything, but that's just kind of what I do. So we're going to do that, finish that up, and then we will adhere this down. Finishing up with these cute little leaves. I like how this background turned out. And this would be very pretty to do a background like this and then color it in. That would be gorgeous. Okay, so now I'm taking the fun foam and adhering that using my Lawn Fawn glued tube. I'm going to adhere my sentiment paper slightly over the edge, and then I'm going to trim down the fun foam slightly smaller than my sentiment. And then I'm going to adhere this down to the center of my A2 size card base. You could use foam tape on this, but what I've kind of learned is that fun foam is pretty inexpensive. So when you have to use a lot of it for a big image like this, it's kind of nice instead of using foam tape, because foam tape is just a little bit more expensive. So now I've used some Nuvo crystal drops, and I have used, let's see the colors here, Caribbean Ocean, Red Berry, Bubblegum Blush, Dandelion Yellow, Apple Green, and Wedgewood Blue. And I've just kind of kept the like colors with the sentiment strips off the side. So I'm finishing up with Caribbean Ocean. And you've got a little bit of color on the background without having to color in any of the images. So that card is super cute. I love how it turned out. See how pretty that is? Okay, on to the next card. So here is the Mom die from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to cut that out of Simon Says Stamp green leaf cardstock. Run that through my die cut machine, pop out the letters. There we go. So now I am using, this came from Simon Says Stamp card kit for May, and this is a Moda Scrap Let Your Soul Bloom paper pack, and I am trimming this down slightly smaller than an A2 size card base because I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp green leaf cardstock and attach that to my A2 size card base. That is cut 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 because I did want a little bit of a green frame. Now I'm going to attach the pattern paper, and I think this is gorgeous patterned paper. And now you can see we've got that little green frame around the card. So attach that to the center. And then the letters for the word Mom, I'm going to use my glue tube. I'm also going to use my T ruler to line these up to make sure I have it straight. I'm going to start at the bottom on the outside edges with my words, with my letters. I've just taken my T ruler, pushed the T part against my Tim Holtz glass media mat, made sure my paper was lined up straight with the grid, and then you just line these letters up, super easy, and then they're not crooked. Sometimes I'm just too lazy to do it, but I just really needed to make sure everything was straight. So I got the 2 M's down. Now I can center the O in between, and you've got all the spacing correctly. If you just start at the top and work your way down, it always ends up wonky. So start on the outside edges, top to bottom, however that works. Sometimes you can even start in the center of something and work your way out, and then you can get proper spacing. Now I'm adding some foam tape behind these sentiment strips. I did the same thing for these sentiment strips that I did on the last ones. Trimmed them down, inked them, embossed them, and now I'm lining them up. They are in order to spell the word Mom. So it says amazing, loved, and admired, but it spells out the word Mom. And I'm going to use my T ruler again to get these sentiments lined up. And these are popped up on foam tape, like I said, because I did want it to have dimension. You could do it in reverse and pop the word Mom up on foam tape, and that would be just as cute. Then I'm going to be using some HoneyBee Stamp, Hug Me, and Be Me, excuse me, that's so funny, Be Mine clay hearts, and I'm attaching those down with my Lawn Fawn glue tube. I felt like the word Mom needed a little bit of embellishment. So attaching those down, and you've got this really pretty card. That beautiful cardstock patterned paper is gorgeous. So now we're going to be done with that one, and we're going to move on to our third card. So again, using this patterned paper from Moda Scrap, I'm using my anti-static tool because I want to ink this up with black ink, but I'm going to be putting clear embossing powder over it because I wanted it to be shiny. So ink that up a couple times, get a good stamp down. And I really loved how simple this paper was with the flowers and the butterflies. And then you've got this bold black sentiment. You could do it in any color though. I mean, you could emboss this in gold or pinks or yellows would be pretty. I just kind of wanted a bold statement on this. So here's the clear embossing powder. This is Ranger's clear embossing powder. Make sure your heat tool is really heated up because this paper is super thin and it will warp really easily. So now I've got my A2 size card base I'm putting on my tape runner. That I'm adding a black strip of cardstock to the left side of the card. My patterned paper is trimmed down slightly smaller, probably about half an inch, quarter of an inch smaller. And I'm going to adhere that down. And then on the left side, you've got this pretty black strip, which really goes with that bold black sentiment. Now I'm going to be stamping in black ink from Simon Says Stamp. Excuse me. It says Happy Mother's Day underneath that. And then I'm going to be adding some of these clay hearts from HoneyBee Stamp. A few of those. These are just the pink ones, and I can't remember if that's the Hug Me or Be Mine. But they're really cute and really sweet. So just adding a few of those, and then this card is super simple and done. So on to this next card. I am inking this up with Scattered Straw Distress Oxide ink. I am using Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. That's the cardstock I tend to use the most unless I'm using like a watercolor cardstock. I'm inking up this background. I'm not super worried about a great blend because I'll be blending it out a little bit more in a minute. Make sure this is nice and dry for this next step because I'm going to be doing some embossing on this. So use your heat tool or set it aside and make sure it's really all the way dry. So now ignore that sentiment strip in the center. This card originally was going one direction and I changed my mind because I did not love it. But I am using it as a guide of where to stamp these floral images, again from the Incredible Women stamp set. I'm stamping them in clear embossing ink. Then I'm going to heat emboss them with clear embossing powder. So you're not going to see a whole lot right this second. You might see that it's a little bit shiny. But what I'm going to do next is, after this is all done and heated, I will be adding some other Distress Oxide inks on top, and you'll see how this image, this yellow, will pop through. But make sure your heat gun again is nice and heated. Heat that up. You can see a little bit of it's shiny there. I'm going to add a few more images of these leaves in and around the stamped image. And the whole time I'm stamping this, I'm like, I just do not love this sentiment strip. I don't love how this is turning out. And I was kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to change up my card? Because I just was not in love with it. Okay, so now here is the Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide ink. I am only going to ink over the part where I had just embossed those images. I will soften up both sides, blend it out with the Scattered Straw, and you do kind of get this really lovely orangey color, which is really super pretty. And I love these two colors together. Worn Lipstick, Scattered Straw, really super pretty. So getting a nice good blend between those. I don't want anything, I don't want big marks of color. I want it to have a nice, pretty blend. Now I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to wipe off, and now you can see that yellow from behind that is sealed within that clear embossing powder. You can see that image pop through the pink, and I love this technique. Spritzing it with my Distress sprayer, blotting it off with a paper towel, and then, because you know how Distress Oxide inks react to water, it's gorgeous. Taking that Worn Lipstick, I die cut out the word Mom out of white cardstock, attached it to some tape so the word could be together, so when I'm stamping down my images and it's crossing from the M to the O, it lines up together. Also, it makes it easy when I'm going to heat emboss these. I'm using some clear embossing ink after I stamp these flowers on the word Mom. It holds them together, super easy. I needed these sentiment, the word Mom, to have some decoration on the letters. I didn't want stark white letters on this card. I just wasn't feeling it. So a little bit of color, a little bit of decoration looks good. A little bit of embellishing. Now I've cut these out 3 times out of white. I'm going to use my Lawn Fawn glue tube to adhere these together. This will give it dimension. You could also use foam tape or fun foam and stick it, or just fun foam and glue. That works wonderful too. I personally like to just cut it out. To me, it just seems a little bit faster when you cut it out of paper and just line it up, but you know, everyone's different on what you like. So getting these all glued down, see how fast, it's so quick and easy. You put them aside to dry. It takes not very long. If you're using this glue tube, I've used the Lawn Fawn glue tube. I've also used Ranger Multimedia Matte. Those two dry really quick. So now I've got a black strip, and I'm going to line that up at the bottom of my stamped images where it's just slightly covering the bottom, and then I'm going to trim off the excess, and then we're going to line up the word mom over this. So make sure it's nice and straight. I'm using the grid on my background to line that up, and then trim that off. So now I'm going to use my Misty, and I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense black ink, which is always a great ink, except for when you are stamping on top of Distress Oxide inks, you need to use an archival ink. So I'm using Ranger's Archival Jet Black, and it is so crisp and black on top of Distress Oxide inks. So nice, good tip for you guys. Adhering this down on an A2 size card base. And then I'm going to adhere down the word mom. Again, starting from the outside so I could line up the mom, get the correct spacing. Then I will put the O in the center, and then that gives you all the correct spacing, and your word is not wonky. Finishing up with the O. And you could use a tape runner for this too. This would work just fine. So now I'm going to be using Liquid Pearls in Shocking. That's the color, and it's a really vibrant pink, and I felt like it would go great on this card. It'll stand out on top of that worn lipstick Distress Oxide ink. So put a few of those dots around. Nothing super crazy, just kind of going in and around my stamped images. And odd numbers always look the best, if you guys were wondering. Some are big, some are little, and I just love these as embellishments. And then let these dry overnight before you stick this in an envelope. So now we are done with that card, and I love how this turned out. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and watching. I appreciate your support. If you like what you've seen, please thumbs up and subscribe, and please share my channel with your crafty friends. I would really appreciate that. There are some affiliate links below. It costs you nothing, but it really does continue to help me create. I hope that this has inspired you. To all you mamas out there, grandmas, aunts, all of you wonderful women, I hope you have a wonderful Mother's Day.